Why did you choose this topic? What does this topic fulfill for you? And what do you hope it will fulfill for other people?
Well, I chose the sort of topic of spirituality and substance abuse because I always had a fascination with how spirituality can sort of positively or negatively affect the mind. In relation to substance abuse, I always found that the sort of topic of substance abuse was something that I was always particularly sensitive towards, and so looking at this topic from this lens as a possible intervention was something that I was interested in studying. I'm also hoping to achieve sort of mental health professionals kind of including this more into their interventions and intervention styles because of the fact that sort of I feel like a lot in sort of like studying this, I found that a lot of the research, especially by Plante, stated that basically historically psychologists found that religion and spirituality was not something that they like to use traditionally.
What does spirituality mean? How does it differ from religion?
That's a great question. So, the sort of difference between spirituality and religion really is that there is really no uniform sort of definition according to Plante. Well, in defining it though, sort of religion we can think of is a more organized sort of way of practicing sort of a faith. However, spirituality in comparison doesn't necessarily belong to a sort of religion or any kind of like organization. It's more about a belief in a higher power or sort of associating with historical figures or sort of any type of guide towards that belief. It can also include nature as well.
Do mental health professionals believe in using religion and spirituality? Historically, what does psychology say about it in therapy?
It's a good question. So historically speaking, actually a lot of sort of psychologists were very much anti-religion, anti-spirituality. And so using it in the mental health field was sort of something that they really wanted to avoid, according to sort of Plante.
What does the research say about the usage of spirituality in programs like AA?
That's a good question. So, in programs like AA, sort of spirituality being used within these programs have actually helped people in their route to recovery more than sort of non-religious or non-spiritual programs. In my research, I've also found that people who were sort of in programs like AA or other spiritual-based programs, the sort of chances of relapse were actually a lot lower, and essentially, whenever they did relapse, the sort of usage of alcohol usage in comparison to non-spiritual or non-religious groups was actually a lot less. So the usage of the alcohol would be less whenever they would relapse when in these programs.
What can mental health professionals do to improve this intervention?
That's a great question. So whenever I was sort of researching, I found that actually because of the way that historically psychologists sort of were shunning away from religion, from spirituality, I actually think that the inclusion of these things can actually improve upon a person's outcomes, just according to this research. Now, although the research that I've done was specifically on substance abuse interventions and substance abuse and how spirituality affects the person, I feel like we can expand this even more to sort of other disorders that we may study in the future. I mean, the limitations in this study, I found a lot of them had to do with funding, a lot of them had to do with sort of not being able to find enough information. For example, whenever I was studying socioeconomic status, it was very difficult for me to find information on how socioeconomic status, for example, might affect this data. And
How has this topic impacted your role as a mental health professional?
wow, so I think that this topic honestly has intrigued me in a lot of ways. In looking at this topic, I feel like I had a lot of trouble in the beginning, sort of wondering about if this was something that I would want to kind of use in my own practice, and if so, how. And so when I was researching about how it made how much of a difference and an impact it made upon the clients, I mean, reading that 40% of the United States considers themselves to be religious, for instance, to be honest with you, it very much impacted the way that I saw the kind of cultural view of America. I think a lot of the time we're not really thinking much on how kind of like the sort of religious culture and then sort of other cultures all around kind of influence the way that we think. And therefore, if we don't think about these things, how are we going to become better sort of practitioners and help people to get better if we don't analyze these things?